You are now listening to Arrowhead Pride Radio, your one-stop shop for all things Kansas City Chiefs. Here's your host, Jack Johnson, and the editor-in-chief of Arrowhead Pride, Pete Sweeney.
Arrowhead Pride is presented by Heartland Financial and Mortgage, where their one and only priority is people first. Visit them at hfmkc.com and by the CW Farm and Ranch, a venue like no other. Explore the Fredonia Ranch lifestyle, the CWFarmandRanchVenue.com.
That's right. Another edition of Arrowhead Pride Radio here on Sports Radio 810 WHB. Actually, what could be our final episode of Arrowhead Pride Radio right here on the dial. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Kyle Collier producing this thing. And a little bit different, maybe for this final episode. As usually, it's Pete Sweeney that sits across from me, but he's actually down at Radio Row in New Orleans, so let's cut right to him. Pete, do you read me loud and clear?
Yeah, I got you. It's good to hear you. It's weird to not see your shining face, Jack, but we're going to make this happen. I, of course, need to say that AP Radio is brought to you by Heartland Financial and Mortgage, open with one primary objective, and that's putting people first. Check them out at hfmkc.com. There's a clear buzz down here. I mean, I know it's only, Tuesday evening, Jack, but I think you could tell that people are excited. They're ready for the game, and I could see, like, even from Monday to Tuesday, the city is starting to fill up quite a bit, and, now we're patiently waiting as best we can for this game on Sunday.
Well, I know for a large portion of America that dislike both of these teams, it would be considered the nightmare matchup that you get Kansas City going for a three-peat and Philadelphia back for the second time in 3 years. And both these teams kind of exude that villainous presence, right? And I think they embrace it. So what does it feel like down there with the teams? Are both these sides trying to play the role of the villain, or is it really just Kansas City that can play the villain and Philadelphia is kind of trying to copycat it a little bit?
Well, I just think that within the white lines, we definitely see Patrick Mahomes animated sometimes, right? I mean, there's that whole thing with Max Crosby where they go back and forth on the NFL Films mics, and he basically says, you woke up the wrong you-know-who, and I think everyone that's a Chiefs fan loves that clip because they love the fire from Patrick Mahomes. And he was actually asked about that before they came down to New Orleans, and he essentially said, I start talking trash during these games if trash gets talked to me. And I think you like that from a quarterback. I also think you always see a certain fire that he has on the field that doesn't extend to the podium, which is exactly what you want. I don't think you necessarily want some of those things brought back to the after the game comments, because I think that adds some motivation to the other team that you don't want. I do think you sometimes will see that from the Philadelphia Eagles. There's a little bit more of that extracurricular. I know that there's been a video circulating of the matchup between the Eagles and the Chiefs last year after they had played in the Super Bowl. The Eagles end up victors, and Nick Sirianni is screaming at the fans and screaming in the tunnel. And it looks like he's calmed down a bit since that moment. I sense that his temperament is a little bit calmer and a little bit more leadership heavy, but at the same time, I just don't think the Chiefs put themselves in that villainous position. Like, you want to talk about the refs, is that really in their control? I don't know. I mean, I don't think that theory has any validity, but at the same time, a lot of people do. So I think when you talk about the Chiefs being a villain, I think that stems more from them plain winning, whether that be from a direct call or just beating the other team, which is what usually happens on a weekly basis.
You're going to be talking to a lot of people down there, and I'm sure already you've had the chance to either chat with people who have spoken to a lot of people or you've done it yourself. Mm-hmm. What's the feeling going into this matchup? Are there more people saying, hey, we're not going to count out Patrick Mahomes, we're not going to bet against Patrick Mahomes when he just seems every single year to defy the odds? Or people, like they did 2 years ago, siding with Philadelphia because they've got such a great offensive line? They've got basically a 2,000-yard rusher in Saquon Barkley and an abundance of weapons on the offensive side.
Yeah, I think down here it'll probably be about split. If anything, I think Eagles fans are probably more motivated to make the trip, just considering that winning Super Bowls at this point for Kansas Cityans is hum-ho, and maybe you've had a bunch of fans that have spent a bunch of money to come see them already win 1 or 2 or 3 Super Bowls in the last 5 years. And so the Eagles aren't so far off, right? They were able to do it with Nick Foles not too long ago, but it is a little bit longer away from that championship, a little bit more removed from that championship than this one. So I tend to think, if anything, you might see a little bit slightly more Eagles support, and they're a fan base that, A, is huge. I mean, it's a bigger metro size than the Kansas City area, and B, it's a good fan base. And now, I don't know about some of the stuff that happens after games in Philadelphia, but more so from a support standpoint, I think they travel really well. So we'll see. I do think it's too early in the week to tell you how many fans of each team I saw. I tend to think a lot of these people will be showing up Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, and we'll get a better sense of that later in the week. But these games are usually a split, and I tend to like it that way. I think it creates a very, very unique environment that we really don't see all year in the NFL. I don't think anyone's discounting or discrediting Patrick Mahomes, but I also don't think that people are just writing off the Eagles. I think this is shaping up to be what has been, I think, in at least that final stretch, the 2 best teams in the NFL.
We've got our very own Pete Sweeney down in New Orleans at Radio Row, gearing up for the Chiefs and Eagles in the Super Bowl on Sunday. Let's get to the game itself and really how both these teams got here. And with Kansas City, I mean, going all the way back to the very first snap in the preseason, they lose who was going to be their number 2 wide receiver in Hollywood Brown. He returns in December. Before week 5, they lose Rashee Rice, deal with that injury. A couple other guys get banged up. They have to bring in DeAndre Hopkins. They bank on the surge of Xavier Worthy. But yet here they are with really only one true loss to their name, because in that regular season finale, they rested all their starters. So one true loss on the year, despite all of those injuries in the wide receiver room, Pete. Was it more impressive this year how they were able to overcome all the injuries, or was it more impressive last year overcoming all the struggles that group seemed to have?
Yeah, I think it has to be injuries, and I think that's where the case for Andy Reid being the coach of the year this year makes the most sense. Now, I don't think he'll win it. I think it'll go to Kevin O'Connell, which is to be expected, because it's more of a comeback. I always say this. It's more of a comeback coach of the year award than awarding the best coach who did the best job. I mean, the top seed's coach just doesn't win enough for what the award's name is. But I think this year has been more impressive, and really just isn't in the wide receiver room. I mean, you think about losing Isaiah Pacheco. People remember, like, we lost Isaiah Pacheco in the beginning of the year, but what I think is forgotten about that, it was week 2. It wasn't like week 4, week 5 where they lost Rashee Rice and maybe some of the other players like an Xavier Worthy had already developed. They had to pivot. Kareem Hunt wasn't here for all the games. Remember that week 3 game on Sunday Night Football, that featured Carson Steele, who was the lead back, and so they bring in Kareem Hunt. They fix that problem. Kingsley Suamataia proved to be too raw to be a starter. They insert Wanye Morris. Wanye Morris gets spun around by Trey Hendrickson and Max Crosby, and suddenly they have to put Joe Thuney out of position, and he has thrived. I think the thing that gives me some positivity going into what I think will still be a tough matchup is just the fact that with Malcolm Hollywood Brown coming back in week 16, you're still building on that. I mean, he got 20 snaps that first game. You got 30-something the next game. Then you mentioned the Chiefs and the Broncos had whatever that was, where the backups played, and they had their first shutout in Andy Reid's tenure. And then you got to the playoffs, which is a different brand of football entirely. I just don't know if we have clearly seen what this Chiefs offense can be. Like, I don't know if we have seen the ceiling yet. For all the injuries that we talk about, I think what's really interesting about this team is if you look at the wide receiver room, you could make a reasonable case that it's one of the better wide receivers in the NFL, wide receiver rooms in the NFL right now. And even looking to next camp, like let's say they are able to retain Hollywood Brown, man, you feel pretty good about Rashee Rice and Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy. No Rashee Rice in this game, of course, but I think the Chiefs were able to buy time, and the fact that they were able to manufacture 15 wins in the process is impressive. And when you mention all the injuries, the key was doing it early. So you could basically have a additional bye week, and they took that lump of that disgusting loss, but it was for the greater good, and now you have a very healthy team. The first thing Andy Reid said this morning at the press conference we all went to was, I have no injuries. And to be a fully healthy and confidently fully healthy, there's not even really a question. I know that some injuries popped up with a Jawan Taylor with the knee, but he's been dealing with that, and I know they're still managing Patrick Mahomes' ankle, but largely it is 100% healthy Chiefs team entering a game against the Eagles where you have offensive linemen banged up, Brandon Graham's trying to return, a couple key players like a Devontae Smith didn't even practice during the Super Bowl bye week. So I do think for all the trials and tribulations that they went leading up to this point, they have the healthier team going into the big game.
How impressive, when we look back, will it be that Joe Thuney mid-season, actually toward the tail end of the season, was able to move to a spot that was such a disaster for the Chiefs for 90% of the season, it felt like, whether it was Kingsley Suamataia over there or it was Wanye Morris or even when it was DJ Humphries for one game. You never really had that stability at left tackle, but when the Chiefs really needed him most, after playing at a Pro Bowl level at left guard, Thuney makes that shift out to left tackle, and in his last performance against the Bills, he was one of the best offensive linemen on both sides of the ball there. So how impressive will that be when we look back? Will that kind of be at the top of the list of, wow, I can't believe that happened, or is he still taking a back seat to Worthy, who came on so strong, or some of the guys they brought in midseason who have made an impact?
Yeah, I think for me, Thuney is the key part of it. Right, like you mentioned, the AFC title game for an out-of-position player against that front to have the highest grade of all the pass blockers on the offensive line, I thought was incredibly impressive. I was interested about this point, and we had a writers sit down with Clark Hunt earlier this morning, and one of the questions I had for him was just about the head coach's willingness and ability to adapt, the adaptability factor, which the Chiefs have had all year of all the positions we just talked about. And Clark Hunt said, well, kind of way, but I mean, not in so many words, but he was like, whoa, let's talk about Brett Veach for a second and bringing in these guys. And Clark made, he's very tuned in. He made an incredible point when he said, yeah, we went out and got all these guys, and even as players return to be healthy, talking about a Isaiah Pacheco, for example, Kareem Hunt still has a role. It's not like Isaiah Pacheco got back, all right, Kareem Hunt is back to the bench. And, you look at Juju Smith-Schuster brought in. As they continue to get players back, Hollywood Brown and DeAndre Hopkins has a couple games in his belt. You have Juju Smith-Schuster, who ends up outsnapping DeAndre Hopkins last game, I think, quietly, and then also having the 2 catches for 60 yards, which were big catches in the game. And so it has been Brett Veach loading up this roster, and that energy has stemmed from this team saying, we are going for it. We're not just going to go with guys and go with replacement players. We're going to go for it this year. And then it's Andy Reid taking what were like 2 to 3 to 4 different versions of this team and finding all kinds of different ways to win. Sometimes it was by 1 score. A lot of times it was by 1 score, right? They only had a couple 2-score wins, but the result is the same. Like, I know it's a very simple thing, but the Chiefs more times than not just had more points than the other team. And really that was all that mattered. And now they're one of 2 teams playing on the last day of the NFL season, and we'll see what happens from there. But I think there's a lot of credit to spread around, and the top of the team, the ownership even feels that way.
We got our very own Pete Sweeney down at Radio Row in New Orleans gearing up for the Super Bowl between the Chiefs and the Eagles. One of the biggest talking points going into this game will be Saquon Barkley. Can the Chiefs actually stop him? Considering the workload he's had this year for Philadelphia, the amount of yards he gets on a game-by-game basis, how do the Chiefs go about slowing down the rushing attack of Philadelphia? Because they've done it before against some really good running backs, but Saquon Barkley, save the best for last, because this has been somebody not just in the regular season, but now in the postseason has really only gotten better, putting up 150-plus yard rushing performances, 3 to 4 touchdowns, it feels like, every single game. Is it even possible for the Chiefs to slow him down, or is he just one of those guys that he's going to get his, and you hope that by the end of it, it's not too much damage that he's inflicted on the defense?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to all 11. I know that is something that is like a Boltonism that he usually says, and I think it is relevant in this one because he's a back that is difficult to take down with just one single guy. I think it is going to take some stacking of the box. I think it's going to be making sure your run lanes are sound. I think it's setting the edge and having a lot of your attention just where is this player going to be, because he's not even just a runner. He can damage you in the pass game. I think it's being smart about where you bring pressure and making sure you don't over-pursue. Like, it isn't an easy answer against Saquon Barkley to just completely load up the box and bring all your guys to the front, because now if he breaks one or two tackles, he's gone. I mean, he was able to do that in the postseason with very impressive runs. And so I think it's a combination of things, and I will tell you, I don't have the answer to that question, but what I can tell you is who does is Steve Spagnuolo. I mean, this team has ultimate trust in him. He seems to always have the correct game plan to it. As you were mentioning, limit opposing running backs who otherwise really have success. I think you saw a little bit more of that earlier in the season with a Derrick Henry and when they played Bijan Robinson and Alvin Kamara. And sure, I think what causes you the most concern is what James Cook was able to do last week. But I just have this feeling, and it is something that we always reference with Bill Belichick, now the great Tar Heel coach, right? It's just making sure that number one target, that number one guy for the other team isn't the one to beat you. And so for the Chiefs, I think it's shutting down Saquon early if they can, making Jalen Hurts throw the football, and then doing a better job than they did the last time around of covering both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith.
Now, lastly, before we get to Ron Cobb, lead analyst of Arrowhead Pride, Patrick Mahomes talked about this game a year ago, and we can all remember him saying, we're going for 3, we're going to be at home this year, you can check that box off. But here he is again, trying to make history, a three-peat, getting 4 Super Bowls before his age 30 season. It's truly ridiculous. I mean, what can you really say about that for not just saying this type of stuff? Because we feel like this happens every single time there's a parade. Oh, we're going to be back next year. I believe when the Buccaneers did it, it was Bruce Arians, making fun of the Chiefs' run-it-back term and tried to coin his own. But the Buccaneers did not get back, right? Because it shows how hard it is in the NFL to do that. But for Patrick Mahomes, just kind of staking his claim that we're going to be back here again, we're going to be winning it, and now he's just 4 quarters away from being able to do that for the second time to the Philadelphia Eagles.
Oh, it's so impressive. And I think what's lost here, and bear with me, Chiefs fans, because this is an excruciating point, if it wasn't for some of the lack of luck that they had in the COVID 2020 year, maybe you enter that Super Bowl with an offensive line. I don't know how the game happens. That was an historic defense that the Buccaneers were rolling out, where I felt like every player was in their prime and it just was relentless pressure. But let's say Patrick Mahomes has that stable offensive line. Let's say they win that game. Now, fast forward, Patrick Mahomes would be going for 5, and Brady would only have 6. So that was such a swing in the legacy. But what Patrick Mahomes has done is put his head back down and allowed Brett Veach to work, allowed Andy Reid to strategize, and has put himself in a position to have more titles before the age of 30 at 4 than Brady did at 3. And I just think that whole sequence that I just mentioned is such a testament to Mahomes. It's not like he's perfect in the playoffs. Sure, the worst finish he has so far has been an AFC title overtime loss, but at the same time, he's faced loss in his career. And the one thing about him, he maintains this trick candle status where you can't blow him out, and he'll always be back, and he's back once again. And I think the Chiefs do it well, man. I think between Mahomes and Reid, and then by extension with Kelsey, and even though he's a little bit goofy, Chris Jones, they have these guys lock in on one game, and that's why they were able to do what they did and win a close game against the Buffalo Bills. And I believe they'll be treating it the same way. Andy Reid is a big believer in routine, and even though we're in New Orleans and I'm staring at Todd Lebo now and we're about to go get some gumbo, I think he tries to make it as close to what they're dealing with in Kansas City on a week-to-week basis as they possibly can. So when they get to this game, despite all the fanfare, despite all the cameras and whatnot and yelling and screaming and how you have two teams in the stands, they play football. And I think they really do the little things well. And more times than not, it's going to be close. And I think sometimes those little things, sticking to routine and trying to do things like you do all the time makes a difference when you have two really good teams like the ones we're going to see on Sunday.
All right, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, as we always do, we're going to be talking with our guy, Ron Kopp, lead analyst over at Arrowhead Pride. He's on deck on Sports Radio 810 WHB.
While you're sleeping after the game, Arrowhead Pride's lead analyst Ron Kopp is in the lab. Now he joins Arrowhead Pride Radio.
Back here on Arrowhead Pride Radio on Sports Radio 810 WHB. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Kyle Culler producing up here in KC. And the reason I say that is that our very own Pete Sweeney is down at Radio Row in New Orleans getting ready for the Chiefs and the Eagles coming up on Sunday night. But a reminder that Arrowhead Pride Radio is brought to you by Heartland Financial and Mortgage. Well, Ron, it's only been a week since we've talked to you, and I know we got more than just a few days until Sunday night, but has your gut feeling changed at all about this game since the last time we talked?
Well, I keep thinking back to the last matchup between these two teams naturally, right? And I should say the last Super Bowl matchup. Obviously these teams played last regular season in Arrowhead and the Eagles got it done. But you just think back to that last game and how well the Eagles offense played and how well the pass attack was able to get the ball downfield against this Chiefs pass defense that was young, right? That was McDuffie's rookie year. That was Karlaftis' rookie year. Their offense has certainly improved, getting Saquon as kind of that X factor in the backfield. But you talk about this Chiefs defense has, made a ton of strides, a bunch of steps since that game, including just last year being a dominant unit. And this year looking to have those stretches at time too. So I think I just keep thinking back to how both teams have improved since that last matchup. It should be even a better game, even though that was an incredible game a couple years ago.
Ron, I need to ask you this again, even though we probably have talked about it a few times now, but is the Chiefs' strategy just to say, okay, we're going to take Saquon out of the game and we'll have single matchups with an A.J. Brown, with a Devontae Smith, and let's see if Jalen Hurts can beat him, or is it more complex than that?
Yeah, no, I do think you're going to see the Chiefs, and you've seen this a lot in their playoff history, their playoff performances in the Mahomes run, where they're able to kind of lock in on an opposing run attack, no matter how strong it is. We've seen Derrick Henry come into Arrowhead in the playoffs. We've seen, the 49ers run offense, obviously, last year, have some moments but not necessarily get going like they want to. I think that's definitely the key, and I think that's where it comes back to Spags. I mean, we all have talked about it, since the AFC Championship, the 4th and 5 blitz. But that is, the key to Chiefs winning these tight, close games is keeping it close, getting them into situations where they have to drop back pass, and Spags just has that wrinkle to throw at quarterbacks. And so I think it always starts with, stopping there. And you've even heard Chiefs players, Chiefs coaches talk about that too, where it starts with focused on, stopping Saquon Barkley. And then, you try to heat up Hurts as you can. You try to take your chances, in coverage, trust your guys back in coverage. Again, last time in the Super Bowl, you talked about McDuffie, Jalen Watson, Joshua Williams, all were playing and all were rookies. Now, the veteran experiences, and that was the first year for Justin Reed in the system. I mean, there's a lot more experience in the coverage. You can trust them to maybe, take away the pass defense while Saquon's maybe stuffed up maybe.
Talking to our lead analyst from Arrowhead Pride, Ron Kopp. Jack and Ron are in Kansas City. I'm coming to you live from New Orleans. Okay, we know who the Eagles are going to try to run their offense through, but for Kansas City, it's seemingly different every game. I mean, sometimes you're looking at Kareem Hunt, who dominates. In that first playoff game, it was Travis Kelce. The second, it was more the Xavier Worthy show. With this matchup, when you look at the Chiefs offense and the Eagles defense, who do you think is going to be that go-to Chiefs player that has the most production when this game's over?
Yeah, that's part of the beauty of the Chiefs offense is that it's hard to predict a little bit on who's going to be that dependable player. And that's really what has kept them so unpredictable as the season has gone on. Having guys like Juju Smith-Schuster pop out in the AFC Championship. I do think when you look at how the Eagles run their defense, they are a similar defense to the Bills when you talk about, trying to play those 5 defensive back sets a lot of the time, playing nickel primarily a lot of amount of the time, even though, maybe your Chiefs offense is setting up in a heavier formation or heavier personnel. They're going to match with nickel a lot. And so I do think in a similar way as last week, you want to attack with a committed run game, where you're talking about gap runs, pulling Trey Smith, getting guys to collapse down on the line and giving Kareem space to, run into the backfield where there's 5 defensive backs and light linebackers, guys he can, have his way with when he gets one-on-one. I think the run game will be a huge part of it. So I think Kareem's going to play a big role in the offense. But in that same breath, you talk about, how it's similar to the Buffalo defense. I think it's going to the Eagles are going to they're going to funnel a lot of short passes, quick passes, and we've seen Mahomes be sharp with those. We've seen the Chiefs offense be very sharp with the quick pass game, especially down the stretch. So that points to Xavier Worthy, who continues to just be the same Rashee Rice kind of ascension, that we saw Rice do last year. And I think you saw Rice make a few huge plays in the Super Bowl last year. I think there's a huge chance that Worthy, is kind of the difference maker on a few third downs, where they run that crossing route and Worthy pops open and gets some yards after the catch. I mean, you're going to see Worthy be a huge part of the quick passing game for sure.
Last time these two teams met in the Super Bowl, Ron, it felt like Jalen Hurts had the game of his life. He just came up a little bit short. So when Steve Spagnuolo and this defense are trying to game plan for Jalen Hurts, how much of that can you take away from that game, or can you really at all? Because, let's be honest, that Eagles team didn't have Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, no, Barkley makes a huge difference even in the pass game. Watching kind of the NFC Championship, this past week, and then also watching that last game, you kind of see the differences in, Hurts he loves to force the ball down the field to his playmaker, A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown is one of the best contested catch players in the NFL. That's someone you feel good about forcing the ball downfield to, depending on the matchup. And especially, you hate to say it, but with a guy like Trent McDuffie, that is the kind of matchup we've seen him, have hard times at. Even in the AFC Championship, a guy like Matt Collins, not a household name necessarily, but a bigger receiver. Those bigger receivers are who can, win against McDuffie at the catch point. But all that to say is Hurts loves to do that, but you're seeing that now he has that Barkley check down option. They use creative ways to kind of motion Barkley in and out of the backfield and kind of force the defense to pay attention to him and maybe open up some of the downfield stuff. Barkley definitely helps the Eagles kind of get more opportunities downfield that aren't just 50-50 balls, But he is going to force it to A.J. Brown. He wants to. And so that is going to be one of the key matchups in this game is McDuffie versus A.J. Brown. And if they do switch that off and they want to trust Jalen Watson or Joshua Williams, I think that's big. I think on the perimeter, that's where they're at their best, right, is kind of playing those big receivers down the sideline. So it's a huge opportunity for those guys to make a few key plays and kind of, maybe stall some drives or kill some momentum for the Eagles by making plays against A.J. Brown downfield.
Engaging the fan base coming into this game, when you look at comments on Arrowhead Pride or you look on social media and what people are talking about, I think the three biggest concerns for Chiefs fans are Saquon Barkley. We've discussed that. I think it's the wide receivers and the pass catchers that the Eagles offer. We talked about that. I think the other greatest concern is the left tackle for the Chiefs. And Jack and I talked before you got on, Ron, and we noted that Joe Thuney had a fantastic game against the Buffalo Bills. Does this game give you any more concern for Thuney? Is it not Thuney, but by extension, how is Mike Caliendo going to hold up? What's your take on the offensive line?
Yeah, no, I think the edges, it's actually a similar kind of matchup in terms of how the pass rush sets up for Philadelphia in terms of against Buffalo. They have finesse, to an extent, pass rushers where Nolan Smith is going to win with speed, dynamicism. Josh Sweat, has some power to him, but he is a flexible dude. He wants to win around the edge. That's what Joe Thuney wants to match up with. So I think you feel good about what you have your matchups with at left tackle. You do have to just look inside at Mike Caliendo versus that Eagles defensive tackle room. Now, the interesting part is, looking at Jalen Carter, obviously the star of the defensive tackle room there, he has played 71% of his defensive line snaps on the other side, on Trey Smith's side of the field this year. He actually has rarely played, over the left guard position this season. So it would be kind of a switch up for Philadelphia if they want to try to take on that matchup one-on-one with Caliendo with Carter. But what's probably going to happen is you're going to get best on best, Trey Smith versus Jalen Carter for a lot of the game. That's going to be an awesome matchup to watch, and definitely one that if Trey can win that, not only is that going to help him get a payday this offseason, it's going to be a huge difference in this game. But the Eagles do have very, very impressive guys on the other side, too, that Mike Caliendo will have to face. A guy like Milton Williams, 93, is someone that can get interior rush, can get penetration in the pocket. So, it will be interesting to see if Creed's going to help Mike Caliendo on those secondary rushers more, or if he's going to help Trey Smith, or are they just going to trust Trey Smith? Hey, you're the guy. You're getting one-on-one Jalen Carter at times. Let's see if you can hold up yourself, and we can give Mike Caliendo that help. And if Trey Smith's holding up in that pocket, it might look pretty good for Mahomes on Sunday.
Ron, for our last question, I want to paint a little picture for you going into this game of, if Jalen Hurts has the ball in the same situation that Josh Allen did back in the AFC title game, where the Eagles have all three timeouts, a field goal will tie it, a touchdown will win it, and there's about 3:33 left to go on the clock. What's your confidence level in stopping an offense like this? I know that Buffalo certainly had their heavy hitters, but you look at the Eagles, they have the better running back, they've got the better receiver room, and maybe they've got the better offensive line in this one. Well, on a scale of maybe 1 to 10, 10 being the most confident, what would your confidence be in the Chiefs' defense getting that stop late in the fourth quarter?
Well, based off the fact that when he did get that, Josh Allen did get the ball in that situation, I wasn't super confident. I wasn't feeling super great. You know, I would feel more confident if it's Jalen Hurts in terms of being, you know, a Chiefs fan, you know, seeing how they, you know, 7 or 8, honestly, because that's the whole part. You talk about the Eagles maybe having better weapons than Josh Allen had for the Bills, but it comes down to the quarterback position. And even a guy like Josh Allen, who you could argue is the second best, you know, quarterback in the NFL, you know, even he, you know, obviously couldn't even get the ball off, couldn't even, you know, get, you know, really someone, you know, an open target. You know, he obviously the ball did get to Dalton Kincaid, but still he was rushed. I don't think Jalen Hurts can handle it as well as Josh Allen can. And if Spags can do that to Josh Allen, I think you feel very good about, you know, getting to those situations, getting that third. You know, you only need 1 third down. You only need that 1 fourth down to make that play. You know, you can, you know, if it's 1 or 2 first downs on the drive and it starts at the 30, that's going to happen. But as long as you get to that 1 third down, and I think Spags can. He's proven that over and over. He's proven that in Super Bowls. He's proven that in the biggest games. So you got to feel very good if it's in the same moment and Spags is able to stop Josh Allen compared to Jalen Hurts.
Well, Ron, appreciate your time tonight. Appreciate your time all season long. You've been phenomenal, and you go enjoy the game on Sunday evening.
Yes, sir. Go Chiefs. Let's get a three-peat.
There he goes. That's our guy, Ron Kopp, lead analyst over at Arrowhead Pride. Has done just great work for us in our second segment. Every single Arrowhead Pride radio show. It's just been a blast having Ron on. And after the game, as Pete always points out, go look for him on Twitter. He'll have a breakdown of the game. And hopefully, as Ron said, it'll be a three-peat for the Kansas City Chiefs. Before we hit break, Pete, any takeaways that you had from what Ron had to say ahead of this matchup against Philadelphia?
Well, I think it should give fans some peace that if Ron Kopp has developed a complete plan to beat the Philadelphia Eagles, you got to know Kansas City Chiefs do. And I think there are answers to a lot of the questions. It really is going to be a matter of execution. And I think this game is close. I think a big thing that the Eagles do that maybe we didn't talk about with Ron is they have an ability to punch out the football. And so ball security is going to be of the utmost importance. And I think if the Chiefs can get out of the game with ideally no turnovers, or, okay, you give them 1, I think you're feeling pretty good about their chances to beat this team in the fourth quarter.
All right, let's hit our final break here. When we come back, we'll have a little bit further of a breakdown of this game because, as you know, this is the last 20 minutes of Arrowhead Pride Radio for the season. Pete and I have taken it the distance. There was no show that got cut short because your Kansas City Chiefs are playing in the Super Bowl against the Philadelphia Eagles. They will go for a three-peat. We'll talk about that a little bit more next on Sports Radio 810 WHB.
Enjoying the show so far? Now it's time to get you involved. Text in your comments or questions to 913-912-4810, and we'll read and talk about it right now.
We are wrapping up the last edition of the season of Arrowhead Pride Radio on Sports Radio 810 WHB. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Kyle Collier's producing, and our very own Pete Sweeney down at Radio Row in New Orleans, getting ready for the Chiefs and the Eagles as Kansas City is going for the unprecedented three-peat. Certainly everybody's got their predictions. They've got their thoughts on it. And before we dive into that, I want to remind you that Arrowhead Pride Radio is brought to you by Heartland Financial and Mortgage. Well, this is usually when we do our three keys to the game, Pete's three things to watch. So I guess number one here, Pete, what are you looking for the Chiefs? Is it going to be on the offensive side of things? Is it going to be on the defensive side of things? Are we talking about special teams here? What's your first key in the Chiefs beating the Philadelphia Eagles?
Yeah, I think when you really examine this game and you really examine the NFL season, I just think it is a testament to adaptability. And we talked about it during the season, just how good the Chiefs are able to adapt. And I think that is what always gives you confidence heading into games like this. Andy Reid knows Vic Fangio well. They've played each other a lot of times. I think Andy Reid has a beat on how to beat Vic Fangio, and I think they have a beat on ways to attack and to score points. And so we know the Chiefs are going to score points, and then from that stage, it's, well, what are they going to do defensively? And I think you trust Steve Spagnuolo. That's where you see the Chiefs win in the Final Four so often in this last half decade. They have the quarterback, and they have the defensive players in place, and they always seem to have the coaching advantage. It's hard to argue that the Chiefs don't have both the offensive best coach in the NFL and the defensive best coach in the NFL. So I think the key word for me for this show, and both in describing the season and what this game is going to be about, is adapting to what is given to you, to the players you have, and just finding a way to get it done in the end.
Well, you look at games like this, and I say games like this, it's just the Super Bowl, right? Because in the Super Bowl, it's going to be defined in a variety of ways, but I feel like the next morning, whether it be the national shows, whether it be our shows, we're talking about the quarterback play. And you have Patrick Mahomes versus Jalen Hurts. Now, credit to Jalen Hurts, because in that first Super Bowl matchup between these two, I thought he played phenomenally. However, there were some critical mistakes that Patrick Mahomes just simply didn't make. I mean, the scoop and score that Nick Bolton had, that was a critical error in that game that allowed the Chiefs to get some momentum. And even though the Eagles had the lead at halftime, it was one of those gifted 6 points that you just can't have in a game like this. So I ask you, Pete, when you're talking about Patrick Mahomes, a guy that almost never makes a critical mistake in games like this, other than the red zone fumble against Buffalo, he was nearly flawless. And then you've got Jalen Hurts, who I think even more so than Patrick Mahomes has that pressure to be perfect. How do you go about evaluating these two? Because you just go into it not expecting Patrick Mahomes to be perfect. He doesn't need to throw for 450 and 5 touchdowns to win this game. He just needs to have a clean game, whereas Jalen Hurts, he might have to go that extra mile or two if he is going to be hoisting his first trophy in his NFL career.
Well, I just think you got to remember of what took place this season when it came to Patrick Mahomes. I think we forget this now because so much football has happened between now and what was that halfway point of the season. When you go through the original early part of the season for Kansas City, Mahomes had interceptions nearly every game, and this was all the way up until week 9, week 10. I went back-to-back games without an interception, had 2 against the Buffalo Bills, and he hasn't really had one since. And when you think about that, that aspect of it doesn't happen by accident, and I think that was an adjustment that he made, that Matt Nagy made, that Andy Reid likely emphasized. We got to stop shooting ourselves in the foot. And it's certainly the case against a team of the Eagles' caliber. And as you go on, right, the teams get better and better and better. And so I think that adjustment has already been made. Now, I think it needs to extend to the pass catchers. I think it needs to extend to the running backs. I think Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt are both good and capable of protecting the football. But it's just this could be a close game. And in close games, you just can't turn the football over. And I think we don't have to worry about it heading into this one because I think it was something the Chiefs saw that was concerning middle of the season and made a very clear intention and adjustment not to keep feeding into that.
I know that one of the other keys to this game will be containing Saquon Barkley somehow, some way. We've already discussed it earlier on in the show, but you just expect him to get the opportunities to get over 100 yards in this game. And I'm looking at the game log right now, Pete, and games where Saquon Barkley didn't go for over 100 yards. You have to go to Atlanta in week 2. He had 95 on 22 carries. The Eagles lost that game. Then he had 84 yards on 10 carries. Not sure why it was only 10. I can't recall if he got pulled from that game due to injury or something. But the Buccaneers thrashed Philadelphia 33-16. They did beat Cleveland when he rushed for only 47 yards on 18 carries. Believe that was a season low 2.6 yards per carry. Then he had 66 on 14 carries against Dallas in Dallas. That was a 34-6 win. Then against Pittsburgh, had only 19 for 65, and they won that game 27-13. So after losing those first 2 games in which he didn't go for over 100, the Eagles won the next 3 where he didn't go for over 100. So in playing a team like Kansas City, if there is a world in which Barkley, let's say, goes 22 for 95, is there really any chance the Eagles can win this game? Because I feel like with time of possession, getting Jalen Hurts comfortable and going, it almost has to be another great game for Saquon Barkley, no?
Yeah, I think he'll get his. And much like last week, when you look at James Cook, who had 134 scrimmage yards, you still have ability to win in those type of games if you just outscore the other team. I think it was a huge breakthrough for Kansas City to get over 30 points against the Buffalo Bills, who came in with a defense that kind of scared you a little bit. And it really is the fundamentals. I mean, I know we're talking about by far the best running back in the world, but it's also Steve Spagnuolo. Steve Spagnuolo is well known for leading his defenses to championships, and it dates back to his time with the Giants when he was able to stop Tom Brady. You mentioned the playoff outings where Derrick Henry comes in as the king, and he really didn't make a huge impact. And it's gap discipline. It's setting the edge for those outside runs. It's tightening up when he tries to run up the middle. It's multiple bodies, something that they preach all the time. It's timely run blitzes and just being smart, the zone blitzes. I feel okay. I don't, I think there is a world where Barkley goes crazy. You think about the 21-7 game against the Cleveland Browns, and Jerome Ford rips off a 64-yard run to close the game. I think that there is a chance that Barkley has a long rushing touchdown, but it's just the game-long management that needs to be there. And I just think that Spagnuolo has proven, these defensive players have proven that they're able to tap in, and I think you feel pretty good about it.
All right, for the last time, Pete, the third and final key you have for this game, how the Kansas City Chiefs can wind up victorious and get that three-peat in New Orleans. Which side of the ball are you going on? Are you going special teams? Are you going player-specific? What's that third key going to be?
Yeah, I think we just got to look at the quarterbacks, right? If this was just a regular season game, and let's make up a week, Jack. Let's call it week 6, and the Eagles were coming into Arrowhead. I mean, this is the problem that I have with trying to make an unbiased prediction each week. Unless it's a top 5 guy, like a Josh Allen, like a Joe Burrow, when the team is playing well, like a Lamar Jackson, it's just tough to pick that other team. I don't think if it was a Week 6 game, many of us would be picking or even considering picking the Philadelphia Eagles. And so I know it's a cop-out answer, but I don't care. To me, it's the quarterback. I'm not going to bet against Patrick Mahomes with Jalen Hurts on the other side of the field. I think it's as simple as that. And I think that should allow all these diehard Chiefs fans that are listening to us and all of them that are going to come to New Orleans, I think it should allow them to sleep peacefully.
All right, let's get to some questions that we have before we wrap up the show. About 5 to 6 minutes left. So, number 1 here. Who is going to be the biggest X factor for the Chiefs on Sunday?
Yeah, I'll let you answer this one too, Jack. I'll give you 2. I think Hollywood Brown is waiting to have a big game. I was trying to get Ron there in my question to him, and he didn't take my bait, which was I was sad about that. But we've seen Kareem Hunt have big games. In the playoffs, we've seen Travis Kelce have a big game, and I think we've seen Xavier Worthy have a big game. I think one of these games is going to be Hollywood Brown's time. We look at Brown, and I think we forget just this aspect that he's still like 4 or 5 games into his comeback. Usually players from injury, they have to hit a certain stride, and then all of a sudden it's explosive. And I think we're seeing signs of it. Had a couple catches last game for 35 yards, and now I kind of think he's waiting to sort of emerge here and be that player we've saw have impacts, in both Baltimore and in Arizona. And on the other side of the ball, for me, it's Charles Omenihu. We know what Chris Jones can do. We know what George Karlaftis can do. I think Omenihu has been the player to unlock them, and I'm very impressive by him to be the player he was last year off an ACL injury. Sometimes it takes a couple of years for these players to get going, and so I will go with Brown, and I will go with Omenihu. What say you?
It feels stupid to give the star player or one of the star players the X Factor role, but I go to the defensive line here and pick Chris Jones because as I go through this game over and over again, I just have to think that Philadelphia's game plan is just going to center around Saquon Barkley, even though they've got A.J. Brown, they've got Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts is a dynamic quarterback. Saquon Barkley is the thing that makes this engine go, and if that defensive line for Kansas City can slow down the run in the way they did all the way back in week 1 against Derrick Henry, as we saw for the first, it felt like 7 to 8 weeks of the season, they shut down every solid running back that was coming through their way. And with Saquon Barkley, as I said earlier, I know that's saving the best for last, but I do question Philadelphia if Saquon Barkley is slowed down. I feel like we had this similar conversation last year going into the Super Bowl where it was Christian McCaffrey, right? If you slow him down, how is Brock Purdy going to beat you? Well, the Chiefs really didn't slow down Christian McCaffrey. He had a touchdown in that game. He didn't have an explosive type game. But that's where I keep going back to with the Eagles. If Saquon Barkley gets held to even 100 yards on 25 to 30 carries, I think the Chiefs did their job. And I don't think that defensive line is going to be able to do their job if Chris Jones is just not an X factor in this one. So he's my pick. It would be great for that pass rush for him to get active again, sack Jalen Hurts, maybe have another strip sack there that can result in 6 the other way. But I think the focus for that defensive line, it's going to have to be just shutting down the middle because you get Barkley outside, it's one-on-one. He's either going to run over you or he's going to go around you. So probably containing him on the interior, that'll be the most important part. So I'll pick Chris Jones as the X factor in the game. Last question we have here, the last one of the season here, Pete. So let's end it with a bang. Have the Chiefs prepared any differently down leading up to the Super Bowl, or is it pretty much the same as the previous 2 over the last 3 years?
This is a cool part about being a Kansas City Chiefs fan over the last decade, and it was something that fans stuck to when I tweeted it out, leading into what is like the Super Bowl hoopla and all that. Just this idea that the Chiefs already have a Super Bowl routine. They like to install the game plan in what was Thursday to Saturday of last week and get that locked in before they even come down here. And so when they do come down here, it's more of like a peer review than it is getting taught something where, you got to face the test on Sunday. I mean, they've been preparing for the test for 2 weeks as if the game was happening last Sunday or Monday. And so they've stuck to that, and we know that it has worked a lot of times here, aside from that year we talked about against the Buccaneers where I think other things were in play. And so stick to what works. Andy Reid's a man of routine, and that has led him to these championships, and we'll see if he can get a 4th one as a head coach on Sunday.
Well, there's so many great storylines going into this game. The obvious one, Kansas City going for that 3-peat. Patrick Mahomes looking to get his 4th Super Bowl in just feels like a handful of years before his age 30 season. It's incredible to think about what Patrick Mahomes has done. Travis Kelce being one of those icons of the Chiefs, even going back to the Alex Smith days, getting another opportunity in the Super Bowl. Andy Reid, the winningest coach for both of these teams. They go head-to-head for the second time in 3 years. And then on the Eagles side, Saquon Barkley going from the Giants, a disastrous season, to being the best running back in football this year, over 2,000 yards rushing and getting an opportunity to play in the Super Bowl. Let us not forget, too, DeAndre Hopkins getting this opportunity at age 32 for the Chiefs. We'll see if he has some type of impact in this game. But right now, Kansas City a 1.5-point favorite. The total at 48.5. Kickoff again will be at 5:30. After the game, you can tune in right here to the Red and Gold post-game show. It'll be a very long night. I'll just leave it at that. I'm not sure what time we'll be off the air, but win or lose, we'll have lots of coverage of that game. Last thoughts here, Pete. I guess let's just go over our predictions in the final minute and a half we got here. What's going to be your final score, and will it end in regulation, or are we going to see another overtime thriller?
Yeah, I think the safe way to go is I think the defenses are better than the last time around, so I think 38-35 is too much. I'm going to go, and I feel it's conservatively 28-24 in favor of the Kansas City Chiefs. I think the Eagles will certainly get theirs, but they'll do enough in the end to hold them to fewer points than they scored. So give me 28-24 Kansas City.
I do like that pick right there. I was going to go 27-24 Kansas City. You know, it'd be nice to have a no-stress game, even if it is the Super Bowl, and all three of their Super Bowl victories. They've all been high-stress. The only one that was not high-stress was the one they lost 31-9 to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'll go 27-24 Kansas City. Let's hope we're both right going into Sunday night. Yeah. Chiefs and Eagles, again, kickoff at 5:30. That'll do it for our final edition of Arrowhead Pride Radio on Sports Radio 810 WHB. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Down in New Orleans has been Pete Sweeney. Kyle Collar's been producing this thing. Coming up next, we're going to have a handful of shows for you, some local shows. I believe we got She's on the Mic with Bethany Bowman, and we've got Covell Hudson. But thank you for tuning in all season long. It's been a blast. I know we still got a few days to go before the Super Bowl, but enjoy the game, Kansas City, and hopefully next time we talk to you, it's a three-peat football team. Have a good night.
This has been another edition of Arrowhead Pride Radio. For much more, head to arrowheadpride.com and follow at Arrowhead Pride on social media.